Let us offer our consecration to the Lord. Lord, we offer up to you this day, and we ask that your name be glorified in all that we do. We ask that we may honor you, love you, serve you, and adore you. We ask that we may always be those who witness to your truth, and we ask this through Christ our Lord. This week is a lot of memorials and feast days, really important ones in the church. Not that any saint's feast day is not important, but yesterday was Saint Ignatius of Antioch, and today is actually Saint Luke. I'm not going to say what tomorrow is. Tomorrow is a very unique memorial in the church, but I'm not going to tell you. You have to listen tomorrow to hear what it is, or listen to the next chronologically. Actually, it's two. But anyway, the next podcast from this particular show over at CatholicAudiomedia.com or your favorite podcast platform. If you go on Reddit, by the way, you can find the connection to the parish here on Reddit at Catholic Audio Media. That's one of the things I've done, and also you can find me other where you see it is posted there. I get someone who keeps downvoting every one of my posts. So if you see one that's been downvoted, vote it up. Just even if you haven't listened to it, just to kind of drive that person crazy. So that'll be cool. And anyway, I'm over at Reddit too, Catholic Audio Media, and RJC02134. That you can find either of those in my accounts. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is today, of course, is an important day. It is Saint Luke. So it's the feast day of St. Luke. So therefore, if you go to church, you will do the Gloria. And of course, St. Luke the Evangelist. Now, he was the third of the four gospel writers. And look at it this way. It's always important to understand. You have Mark in the order, not in the order that they are in the Bible, in the order that they are written. You have Mark, you have Matthew, and you have Luke, and then you have John. Well, there is a 3-year cycle, and so it's Mark, Matthew, and Luke. A, B, and C in that order. No, I meant Matthew, Mark, and Luke in that order is the order. So starting in December, we're going to be looking at the Gospel of Matthew. But right now, since we're in year C, we are looking at the Gospel of Luke. And Luke is primarily written to Gentiles. Now, Father Rufus Pereira, the late Father Rufus Pereira, talked about that he also believed, in a way, it was written to women. Important thing there, but it's written to Gentiles. It is also written to, it's really a lot of social justice issues are in there. So, for example, it's in Luke that you see the story of, and you don't see it in the others, the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. That's in Luke. And you also see the story of the good thief who's brought to heaven. That's in Luke, and exclusively in Luke. So we see that part of Luke's gospel. So we know the story of Luke. But in the first reading, which we see here, really powerful story that it brings us the practical realities of our faith. So we go back to the first reading, and it comes from 2 Timothy. So this is St. Paul writing to 2 Timothy. And the reason why it's here is Luke's name is mentioned, where St. Paul talks about that Luke is the only one with me, because others actually abandon him. But there was one particular guy that is mentioned, of which it's understood that we don't know much about him, but he was, speaking of people who downvote me, he was the absolutely... he's mentioned in the reading as an enemy of St. Paul. And that's kind of a really interesting little story there. Now, one of the reasons why it's important to understand that is because it also brings up the practical reality. Doesn't say anything about Alexander the Coppersmith, except for that he really gave Paul a hard time. Now, this kind of reminds me of an interesting story by one of the singers in a group called NWA, and that was Ice Cube. And the story is actually interesting because they had a rather intense song. I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to go into the name of the song because I can't say it on the radio anyway, but they had a rather intense song. The story of the song actually is in the movie Straight Outta Compton, which, again, based on the explicit lyrics and everything else, you probably do not want to go see that. But Ice Cube talked about there was a time that George H.W. Bush was president, and he brought up the name of the group, and he brought up the name of the song that was very disturbing to a lot of people at the time. And he said, when the President of the United States mentions your name, your life is changed. And he talked about how all of a sudden he's got Secret Service at his door and everything else. He says, your life is radically changed. Well, we can look at that same general idea. We don't know anything about Alexander the Coppersmith, but his name is mentioned in this letter from St. Paul. So number one, there was a lot of difficulty between St. Paul and Alexander the Coppersmith, and that there is going to be people who, for the next 2,000 years and more, are going to investigate who this Alexander the Coppersmith is. We're going to talk more on the other side of the break. You're listening to St. Anthony Overnight from St. Anthony Parish in Alston, Massachusetts, right here on WEZE 590 AM. You can now leave a message for us, which we can air and discuss on this program. Just call 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. 617-297-7452. Feel free to call, leave a comment, a question, or even feedback, and we may play it on the air. I can discuss your comment or question as well, so give that a try. 617-297-7452, 617-297-7452. I want to call your attention to Catholic TV, which offers great faith-filled, family-friendly programming 24 hours a day. You can find your cable channel at www.getcatholictv.com, and you can watch online on the free apps or check out the YouTube channel. Daily Mass, Rosaries, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Novena are all available online and on demand. Check out CatholicTV.com. And don't forget our own website, CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. Check out our website. Check out the archives of the show. And I've changed it all. I've really kind of made it look a lot better. And I've also added my own webpage and all that. So you can see all that over there at CatholicAudiomedia.com. I also, anyone who's been on my show, I have now put in you can see it mentioned on the show. Anyone who's had something that they like, a book or anything, you can see it in a honeycomb form, and then you click on that and it brings you right to their webpage. So it's kind of interesting. I put that up. But anyway, so I've changed all that out. CatholicAudiomedia.com. And don't forget, you can listen to the show on many podcast platforms. If you follow us on Reddit, or if you follow us, or even just follow Catholic Podcasts on Reddit or Catholicism on Reddit, you're going to find that I connect you now with the Amazon platform, the Amazon Music podcast, and you'll see Catholic Audio Media there. And if you go there, you check it out. But you see, that's how and it seems more people are listening to us that way. In any case, I wanted to bring up Alexander the Coppersmith. So it's a very practical reality. And since we're also talking about St. Luke, who kind of brings up a lot of just the simple, real social issues that are just real life, and his gospel, it's a simple, practical reality. So Paul's coming and he's preaching the gospel, but he preaches there's only one God. And this God has a son who is God, named Jesus Christ. There are no other gods. And Alexander the Coppersmith was in the business of selling figurines of the other gods. So needless to say, now his pocketbook is being affected by Paul's preaching. You know what? There are certain things that are going to anger people a lot. It's his livelihood. And so obviously he's going to do his best to silence Paul. So Alexander the Coppersmith has embraced the economy of the pagan faith that he belongs to, and St. Paul is teaching the theology and the philosophy of Christ, who is the true God, the living God, and those two things are clashing. And when they clash, you see this major rivalry that happens where Alexander the Coppersmith, I actually think, if I'm not wrong, wanted Paul dead because he was costing him money. And that's always an interesting issue. You know, it's kind of like, you know, the story that we don't preach politics from the pulpit. It's forbidden by the IRS. Well, that's because Lyndon Johnson was being affected. His votes were being affected by the preaching of a preacher in Texas, because he was from Texas. And he was a senator, and a very powerful senator. So he put that law through. Why? Because it was a clash between his livelihood and what this preacher was preaching. And it's the same kind of clash with Alexander the Coppersmith. His livelihood is being affected. And he and Paul could have gotten along if that wasn't the issue, but no. And of course, Paul is not going to change his teaching, and Alexander the Coppersmith is not going to change his business. And it became this very clash. That's as we understand it. And going back to what I was saying about Ice Cube, you know, when your name is mentioned, in his case, he was mentioned by George H.W. Bush, who was president at the time. When your name is mentioned in the Bible, in this case of Alexander the Coppersmith, people want to know who you are. We'll talk more tomorrow. Have a blessed day. If you would like to support our program, please consider a donation to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. There are several ways to consider this. One is to purchase any of our merchandise, which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. There are coffee mugs there. There's also my latest book, Encounter Christ in Your Humanity, all of which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. You can also donate to the show directly through either the Donate tab, also at CatholicAudiomedia.com, or by sending a donation to the U.S. Postal Service with your questions and comments at 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. That's St. Anthony Parish, 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. Finally, the best way you can support our parish is to attend Mass on Sundays at 10 o'clock and be a part of our parish. We thank you for any support you would like to give to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts, the sponsoring parish for this media outreach to Catholics and other Christians in the WROL, WEZE, and podcast listening audience. In Cristo vivimos.